Hello, and thank you for joining me for a walkthrough of the enhancements for the Dynamics GP 18.2 release. This release came out in October of 2019, so you may also know it as the October 2019 or Fall 2019 release of Dynamics GP. My name is John Kirsch. I'm the GP Product Lead at Dynamic Consulting. I have my contact information at the bottom of the screen here and at the end of the slides. Feel free to reach out with questions or follow me on some of the social media sites or check out my blog and continue to get new content from those locations. So let's get started here. First, we're going to focus on the system-wide enhancements inside of Dynamics GP. I want to mention as we get started, you'll see at the top of the screen in the title, all of these are hyperlinks. So you'll be able to click on those if you get the slides, and it will take you to the Microsoft Docs online pages. So you can go ahead and click on those links and get back to the documentation that's available from Microsoft. So the first enhancement I want to talk about is the compatibility with Dynamics GP in 18.2. So as you can see on the screen here, we are now able to use GP with the latest releases. So Microsoft SQL 2019, Windows Server 2019, and Office 2019 are all compatible with the newest release of GP. A new feature around Smart Lists inside of Dynamics GP are some new date options. So you can see on the screen I have them included here. We'll go ahead and switch over in a second here to take a look at those. But we are now able to select the prior month, prior period, next month, or next period. So those are based off the system date. And so whatever we have our system date, we can, again, using the period or month, go back or forward without having to change those smart lists. So let's take a look at that in GP. So in GP, I've navigated to my account transactions inside of the financial series, and I'm going to go ahead and load the default option here. And you can see that loads a number of transactions. I'm going to now click on the search button and take advantage of these new features. So if I want to come into the transaction date, and again, rather than having to maybe change this date, if I'm using this for part of month end closing at the beginning of the next month, I can easily use this feature to be able to save a smart list favorite and allow that to load without having to change this every time. So I want to go ahead and say that it is in my prior month. So I'm going to go ahead and use the option here. For a lot of folks that have prior month or your fiscal period set up as a month, those values are the same, but obviously if you have those different, you can take advantage of whichever one works best for you. So with that simple change, you now see that I am returning for April of 27, and that's my transactions. My system date is set to May 12th of 27. So you can see that's working for me. It's pulling back those. So with this, again, if you want to make this really useful from my view, we want to go ahead and save that favorite then. So something like prior month transactions, and we can obviously choose our options for who's visible and if we need a password. So I'll add that favorite, and again, now I can always use that and not have to change my date period. The next feature I'm going to talk about is in the user access setup. So there's been a few changes made to this window to make it a little bit easier, and especially for those with a number of companies or a large number of users in the system. So the few things are highlighted on the screen. So the first is that our sort is now available by company name. So we can sort that way rather than by database name or not having that in an order that's easy to find. The second one is we can actually use the find field that's right above that. So we can actually type in a company name. So if we just need to add access to one, if we've got a large list, that will quickly narrow that down. And then last, we can choose to include or not include inactive users. So, we're typically not changing security on those inactive users. So this allows us to get those out of the way to make our user list smaller. I've navigated into my administration window here inside of GP, so I'm going to go ahead and open up that user access. I'll enter my system password, and now I'm in the window. So I'm going to pick a user account here, and as you can see, it is sorting right now by the database name, and if I go ahead and change that company name, it sorts that differently. So again, much more useful as we get to a larger number of companies, especially when it starts to spill over a single screen. I can also go ahead and search for a company. So I type and I hit enter and it filters that down. I can also remove that and hit enter and everything comes back. And then last but not least here, I do have a user for demonstration called Inactive User. So if I uncheck that box, you can see they go away. So again, with a larger list, that will go ahead and narrow that list down for you and take those inactive users out of the way. The next section I'm going to talk about is about workflow in GP 18.2. There are a number of changes, so decided to create a section all by itself here and focus on those changes. The first thing we're going to talk about are some new security workflows. So within GP, we now have workflows available for changes or for creations of accounts and security items. So users, user security, security roles, or security tasks. So we can turn on those workflows, add criteria like we would to other workflows in the system, and assign the approval process that needs to be completed. In addition to that, because we have those reports and the tracking that is available, this adds kind of a security audit log of what changes are happening in there. So this does help out with being able to track those security changes. The next feature we're going to talk about is the export and import option for workflows. So you can see that highlighted on the screen here. The new feature allows us to be able to do simply that, export a workflow or import it, or both. It will use a JSON file, so it takes care of that. All inherently, we don't really need to worry about the file itself if you need to export it and then bring it back in. So a couple of instances, if you have a test environment, you may want to set up and test your workflow inside of that test environment. And then when you know it's all working as expected, we can export it and then go into production and import it in there. It also works good for partners working with their customers to be able to, again, do some testing and set up and then be able to put it into another environment. So whatever that situation may be, allows you to be able to go and export and import it. After you do an import, you do need to set up the workflow approvers and the message options in the imported system. So that may be different because it's not necessarily tied to the same environment. So those are essentially reset when you import and need to be set up again before it can be used. One of the other new features here for workflow is the ability to change the approver for active workflow tasks. So this is a nice feature if we've got something going on, like somebody's out of the office, or we just have a change in responsibility of who needs to do something. We can go use this new window here to be able to make the changes and put this in place. So we do need to have the proper security. So SA type user, power user type user would be able to go in and make these changes here as far as delegating that to somebody else. To demonstrate that, I've navigated in GP to my administration window, and I've expanded my workflow already under company, and here is where we have the edit workflow approver option. So I'll go ahead and load that in my system. And it took a couple seconds as it's trying to authenticate, but that is open here now. And you can see that we have a few different options here. I can use the workflow manager. I can do the workflow approver, so the specific person, or by workflow type, to initially filter down or find the workflows that I want to change. I can also use the date option here and filter that as well. I don't have any active in my system to be able to demonstrate that specifically, but you can see pretty self-explanatory window to be able to filter and find your results here and then process those to make the changes. Next, we're going to talk about a workflow change for the vendor approval workflow. So this is an interesting one from my standpoint. I've had a lot of conversations over the years of workflow being available, and a lot of times they pertain to certain fields that get updated that we don't want to trigger workflow. I've had a lot of conversations around vendors and POs. That is not what this is. This is actually the opposite, that we're adding 2 more fields that will trigger the workflow. So if a vendor is marked on hold, or if there's a document attachment added to the vendor, it will trigger the workflow to be submitted again so that that vendor has to be approved. Whenever that is changed on the hold side, whether it's off or on, that again will trigger that vendor maintenance to be able to be approved. We can still, set up our criteria and rules that may be in place to handle that of whatever those approval steps are. But now those 2 fields, or in the case of the attachment, something being added, will go ahead and trigger that vendor approval process. Next, we're going to move into the financials series and talk about the enhancements for those areas of GP. So the first option I'm going to talk about here actually affects even more than just the financial series. So it is available in GL, AR, AP, etc. But it also rolls down to the other reporting areas of GP too. And that is that we can now copy reporting options inside the system. So you can see on the screen, I have that highlighted, the new button that's on the screen. Quite simply, if we have a report option that's saved in the system, we can go ahead and copy that to another one. So if we have a number of criteria that's in there, or again, something like the trial balance that we have on screen here, if we have a number of options set that we don't want to have to kind of go back and forth and verify that they all match, we can copy that and maybe make one change to it and go ahead and use that new option for the slightly different purpose that we created. So I've navigated to my sales series, and I'm going to briefly show you that new feature and how it works. So I'm going to go ahead and open the trial balance. So I'm under Sales Reports, Trial Balance, and I'm going to use the historical age trial balance like we had in the screenshot. So I have one called Current Date, so I'm going to open that just to take a look at it. So I used Current Date, which is my print or age as of field. So that's kind of how I keyed off the name, and I have all my other settings the way I want them. So maybe I want this exact setup, but I want current date by doc date. So, and it's too long to put date in there, so I'll stop at doc. But the other one had GL posting date. I want to switch that to doc date. So I've created a new option. And how this works is that I create that option and then I copy from a different option. So I'm going to now pick to copy from that current date and say OK. So now I have those settings, but I want to make that one change. So I'll switch that to document date and I can go ahead and save it. So now I've simply created that option and didn't have to kind of verify that all the other settings are the same. The next feature I'm going to talk about is the report groups. So this is a feature that I have not seen used all that extensively, but certainly can be used to help streamline, especially like a month end or period end process, to be able to print a number of reports together when you're ready to do that and not have to navigate to a number of different places in the system to be able to run those reports. So the request and feature that was added with this is that there was a limit before. You couldn't have any more than 32 reports. So now if you need a larger report list, you can go ahead and add to that report. So I think there's no limit at this point as far as the number of reports. Obviously, it just takes the amount of time that it would to run all those reports for it to complete. So to show you that option, I'm going to go ahead and navigate here like I did to financial, and I'm have my reports section open here, and our groups are listed right here. So I do have a group already called month end with just a few reports in here, for example. For those not using it, just want to also show where this is if you're interested in taking a look at it. But otherwise, I can go ahead and again pick the various reports that I might want to add in the system and just simply find those report options and insert in here. So I'm not going to take the time to get over 32 at this point to add those all in here, but certainly want to show where that navigation is so that if you are using it, again, you know you can add to that if you need to, or else something for you to take a look at if you're new to this feature in GP. The next feature in the financial area is the fiscal period setup window. So seemingly simple change here, but can be really nice to get a quick picture of the entire list of periods. The simple change is that this window is now bigger than it was before. So this window should now fit in, as you can see, your periods. So we've got 12 plus periods that fit on the screen versus before, depending on resolution, probably had like 10 or so that showed up on your screen. So now we can get a quick picture again of which series are open or closed inside of GP. So you can see here I've navigated into GP and I've opened up my administration series, and I can now open up that fiscal period window. And just to show not any tricks or anything done with the screenshot that was put in there, you can see here that I can see all of my periods as soon as the window opens up. So again, nice quick view of the window and all of the series. Sticking in the GL area here is we have a new field on the journal entry inquiry window where we can see who posted that transaction. So that, again, I believe this was an idea that was submitted and voted on. So a quick plug in there is that if you do have ideas, you can go ahead and enter those into the site and try to get some support behind those and get those ideas voted on and added to the program here. So some of these kind of simple ones have been requested or suggested over the years, and just make all of our lives a little bit easier to be able to quickly find this information. So as you can see on the screenshot here, you'll see that user that posted it, and that is in that upper right corner. So it'll be available in the entry inquiry window, as I mentioned, and I'm not going to navigate into GP for this one because we can kind of see where that is here. But this will also show for any historical entries that are in the system. So this isn't something new. It's been tracked in the system kind of forever with GP, I believe, but it wasn't just made readily available for us to view. So again, it's been added for transactions even going back to prior to this release. The next feature we're talking about here is the Excel copy-paste feature. And that feature was added a number of releases ago into the desktop client for GP. So the full version of GP has been using that for a number of years now. So this was also requested, and for those that are using the web client, wanted to be able to take advantage of that feature as well. And now it has been added in 18.2. So this is a little bit different though in functionality just because of the interface and how the web client works versus the desktop client. Instead of doing an actual Excel copy and paste like we did through the program and then pressing the button in GP, we actually need to have a saved Excel file in that same format, as you can see on the screen here, where we save that somewhere where we can access it through the GP web client. and then we browse to that Excel file and select that Excel file, which will then import it into the detailed lines of your journal entry. Everything else is really the same as far as getting it formatted. The one difference, again, is that you actually have to save and browse for that file rather than a copy-paste. I'll note as well, one of the reasons I wanted to make sure to share the template on the screen is that there's no headers in that file. So you can see that's the format there. We don't want that header. I know a lot of times we've used that header in the past for a template because it makes it nice and easy for those needing to create an entry in Excel to be able to have those headings there. But if you use those, just be sure to delete the headings out before you save the file so that it will work successfully and not error out because of that header row. The next feature I'm going to talk about is an enhancement to the document attach feature. A number of versions ago, document attach was added to the system, and since that time it's been continued today to be enhanced with most versions that are released of GP. So we're seeing other windows or features that are included with the attachments. So with this one is focused in the bank area. So now we have the ability to attach documents into those bank transactions. So you can see there the list of those: bank deposit entry, transaction entry, deposit entry zoom, and transaction entry zoom. So basically the inquiry windows have those attachment options available as well. I'd like to demonstrate this feature to you inside of GP. So I've navigated into the financial series, as you can see, and I'm going to go ahead and open up my bank deposits window. So inside of here, I can start to create a transaction or a deposit, and I'll pick my checkbook ID. I'll leave the rest of this information defaulted. I can go down and perform my normal task here to pick my deposits here that I'm going to include, or transactions that I'm going to include in the deposit. And I'm going to now have the attach option up here. I do have to save this transaction to make sure I can attach to that record. And now I would have all of my normal options that you have for the document attach. So I can scan something if I have a scanner attached, or I can attach by browsing out to a file that exists. So once I would OK that, my paperclip would change to the attached image, like the paper with the smaller clip on it, and I can go ahead and proceed with saving or posting this transaction. Switching gears now into fixed assets, we have a new feature that's available when we're using the transfer for a fixed asset. What the change is, as you can see highlighted on the screen here, is that we now have the class ID available for that transfer process. So basically, we can take advantage of transferring the asset into a different class and having it roll down like the account changes that would be applicable for that. I'll go ahead and switch into GP here and demonstrate this. My transfer is available, of course, under the transactions, under the financial series. So I'll go ahead and open up my transfer window. And I'm going to go ahead and pick up an existing asset here. So this asset has the furniture class ID. And just to take a quick peek at that, if I drill into the GL accounts, you can see it's using that 6,200 depreciation expense. And you can take note of the other ones if you like, but we'll just kind of focus on that one here. So 6,200. If I say I'm going to transfer that, and I'm just going to pick a random one here. So we'll pick equipment and take a peek at this again. And so now this went from 6,200 to 6,220. My account changed with the asset, so it again is rolling down those class ID changes in there. It allows us to take advantage of similar functionality to how we would create a new asset to be able to use that in the transfer process now. Moving on to the Payables series, this also has been a feature or a request for quite some time with GP, basically asking for some more room and characters to be able to use in the description for a payables transaction. The change that has been made is that there is a new long description field up to 200 characters that is in addition to the existing description field that's in the transaction. We see that in the transaction entry is where we're going to enter and edit that. We also then see that in the inquiry windows as well here. This is available then to be able to print on the payables reports that are in the system. But I'll make a note, most everybody has like the checks modified, or some of the other reports may be modified as well. So if you do have a modified report, anytime we add a new field or a change like this happens, somebody would have to go in and modify that report to reflect the change that's available now with this new field. So inside purchasing here in the transactions, let's go ahead and open transaction entry. And we'll see here by default, I am not seeing that long description field. This is how it will look in GP if you upgrade and you don't make any changes to setup. So if you get upgraded and say, hey, I want to take advantage of this field and now I can't find it, what's going on? Well, we need to make a quick setup change to make that available. So I'm going to navigate down here under Setup and Payables. And we have a new checkbox that's in this window that I can go ahead and check and say, yes, I want to enable the long description. And let's say OK. So as simple as that. Now I will go back into my transaction entry and voila, there it is. Simple magic here, right? So happy to be able to turn that on with, again, very little effort and make that field available. The bigger amount of effort may be, though, if you want to make that visible on certain reports that are already modified. You would have to make sure and go and make those changes. So whether that be to replace the existing description field or add that, you can make the determination of the best way to set that up and take advantage of this new field. Sticking in the payables area, we have another enhancement here that has to do with the edit payment batch window. In this window, as you can see on the left here and highlighted, we now have an indicator if a vendor is set up for EFT. So you may have different classes or payment priorities or filters that you use in your bill payment batch to separate those. There's a number of different ways that that's typically accounted for, but sometimes we get in here, or maybe you just use the edit payment batch window to build your batch and forget or want some indicator here to be able to see which vendors are set up for EFT and which ones aren't. So now we'll be able to see that over in that left-hand column. Displays just as seen there. So again, if their bank information is set up for EFT, you'll see that indicator on the screen for you. We have one receivables enhancement here to share with you, and that is in the Apply Sales Documents window. You can see this highlighted on the screen as well. What we have available now is to be able to see the check or card number right on the Apply Sales Document window, and rather than just in the drill down window here when you're looking up a document number. This is especially nice if you're using the scroll arrows there that we can scroll back and forth to open up the documents that are available for us to apply. Or if, again, we've selected one and we want to verify we're still on the right document number, we can go ahead and see that right on the screen. A nice usability enhancement there to probably save some drilling into that other window or just validation for us in the screen. Now we're going to move into the distribution area of GP and take a look at the enhancements in those areas. The first enhancement that we are going to talk about is related to POs. When we enter a payables transaction for a customer that has a PO that exists in the system at the time, then it will go ahead and pop up this message, and we can choose what we want to do as far as do we want to continue or go to that list to be able to take a look at it, or just cancel it and kind of reset that transaction there. With that, The change that has happened is that now when we go to that navigation list, it'll actually leave this payables transaction open. It'll minimize the window, and we'll open up that navigation list for us to take a look at the list and make sure that there's not an existing purchase order that we should be applying this invoice to, rather than having a separate payables transaction getting entered here. This does rely on a couple of things that we'll take a look at in GP, and I'll show you to make sure we have this set up. Inside of GP here, we're going to take a look at a couple of windows inside the purchasing series. So the first thing I want to look at is going into Setup. I'm going to open up my Payables Setup, and I'm going to look at the checkbox right here, which right now is marked Warn if vendor has existing purchase order. So this was an enhancement a few years ago inside of GP as well, and by default that was not turned on. At some point during past upgrades, or if you're on a current one that has jumped several versions, you may have to come in here and turn this on to start with. But for now, I'm going to show you what happens if this is not turned on. So this, again, would be kind of the default option that happens during an upgrade, is that feature gets added but not turned on. So if I go into transaction entry, I'm going to start a transaction, and Ace Travel, this vendor, does have a purchase order available for me. So normally this would prompt me for a review of that purchase order to make sure I want to proceed, or the message popping up. So I'm going to hit save, and you can see there it allowed me to save that. No message pop up, nothing came on the screen at all. So I'm going to close out, just go back and recheck the box here to give me that warning. I'll go ahead and say okay. And I'm going to go back into my transaction entry window. So I'm going to put this into the exact same test batch. I will pick the same vendor. I have to make up a different document number, and we'll enter $10. So I'm going to hit save here, and now I get that message popping up. So I've turned that feature on, or back on in my case, and now I have the option. So it tells me right on the screen at this point, I can choose to continue. That'll allow me to post or save that transaction. I can choose to go to look at the navigation list, or I can cancel just to return to the window here. So let's walk through those. I'm going to cancel first. Nothing really happened. It didn't save. I'm going to hit save again, and I would have to hit continue here to completely save that document. So it just basically kind of puts me back to the previous step if I cancel. Next, I'm going to hit go to. So you'll see quickly that my screen was minimized, and now it is loading my navigation list here. So now I'm seeing my transactions here that are created for a travel company, so the vendor that I had selected. So I have some POs that are out there, I have some payments, invoices, so this kind of shows me everything, but gives me the option to take a look at what's available for this vendor, and see if maybe there is a different path that I should proceed, like if I should be entering this as a PO invoice rather than a standard payables transaction invoice. So if I'm okay with that, and I say I've looked at that list, yes, I want to enter it, I could either bring it back from my taskbar on Windows, or I can just click on the link there as well, and it opens my window back up. You can see it's exactly where I was with the $10 purchase. I say I do want to save it. I still get that message one more time, but this time I'm going to click continue and say yes, I want to save it. Now it's in the batch, and again, it can be posted whenever I am ready to go ahead and proceed to posting my batch. Similarly, we have another navigation type enhancement that has to do with POs. This one actually has to do with the purchase order preview window, and it has to do with basically creating the PO and what happens where we go on the screen. So we have the message here, you can see on the right hand side, where we can skip displaying the new purchase orders. So if we want to basically not look at the navigation list of what was created, we can go ahead and click yes on that. But the new enhancement here is that we can go ahead and set a default for this. So we don't have to pick the option all the time. If we always say no here, we can turn that off. Or if we always go to the navigation list, we can turn that option on as well. So in order to set this preference inside of GP, you need to navigate to the purchasing series, and we'd be under Setup and Purchase Order Processing. So once this screen loads, you'll see that new option that's added to the setup window here, and that is skip displaying the new purchase order. The default, as it's been in the past, is showing that message that we had on the screen there, is whether or not you want to essentially display the navigation list or not. And then we also have the option here, as we mentioned, to don't show the message and open a new PO, or don't show the message and don't open the new PO. Let's go ahead and don't show it, but we will open the new PO. So we'll demonstrate that, and I will say OK. And I'm going to actually use my sales transaction entry to proceed through this. I'm going to create a new order here. I'm going to use a test batch. I do require my customer PO number field, and let's order a large quantity of an item. We will back order all of those, and we have a credit limit, but I'm okay with that. So at this point, I can go ahead and purchase this item. I'm not going to really look to change anything. Vendor ID is fine, so I can just go ahead and generate. So I can look at my report here if I want to. I'm just going to cancel that. And you can see it kind of working in the background here. I'll go ahead and close out my transaction entry window. And now you can see it went ahead and opened up the navigation list where I can take a look at the PO. So I can double click on that PO, and there we go. We've got the 10,000 units that I wanted to order. So again, just getting rid of that message. If you always choose one of those options, let's get a couple of clicks out of the way and go ahead and proceed with how you prefer to use GP. The next enhancement we're going to take a look at is in the item stock inquiry window. And the enhancement is that we now have date filters inside of this window. For those that especially have a lot of activity or a lot of history within or for an item, we certainly have had the sites to be able to kind of filter that down if you have multiple sites. But this can really help if we're looking at some quantities, if we want to have a picture, or just trying to find a transaction within a certain date range. So I've really liked having the ability to use this and filter down that. So let's take a quick look at that. So inside of GP, I've opened the inventory series, and let's go under inquiry, and we will go into that item stock inquiry window. So I'm going to pick this item that I know has a bunch of activity here. And again, now we have our date filter fields available for us. So for me, because of this being the sample company, April 12th of 27 has a whole lot of activity on that day. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that and hit redisplay. If you noticed on the right-hand side, my scroll bar was much larger before. Now I've gotten down to just those transactions. So let's switch that back real quick just to have a picture of that. You can see here, again, I've got a number of different transactions. Let's even pick here. We've got 326 of 27. We'll redisplay. And we actually got down to one transaction there. So again, trying to find transactions or activity that's happening within a smaller window of time will be able to be much easier accomplished in this window by using that date filter. The next inventory enhancement is on the item price list report. So we have a new option here, whether we want to include or exclude inactive items off the report. So you can see that highlighted on the screen, a simple checkbox there where we get to choose whether or not we want to include or not. Again, note that it is Include. We need to check that if we want those on the report. And to show you where that option is, if we are, again, still in the inventory series, we're under Reports and we choose the Item option. From here, we have the item price list, and I'm going to pick my demo option and modify that. And you can see here, this option, I have marked the inactive items, so I do want to see those on the report, but very simply can uncheck that if I want to exclude those and they won't show up on the report. So easy option there to be able to add those filters. And last here, we have two more changes related to items that we want to cover here in the distribution series. Those are that, first off, we now have the inactive field that has been added by default to that default item smart list inside of GP. Have that over on the right-hand side. The inactive is visible there. That will be there on that star or default option inside of smart list. The other one, I'm actually also displaying on that smart list, but the fact is that GP has added the ability or the tracking of the user ID that last updated or changed and saved the item master record. That can also be added to the smart list, so I'm showing it added. It's not there by default, but it is there now. That can be added. So to show you those couple of changes here, I'm still in my inventory series, but I'm going to go ahead and pop open the smart list. And as that loads, I'm going to expand my inventory and items options. And we'll go ahead and look at that default option or smart list. What we mentioned first is that the inactive column and field is available here. So you can see all of my items are no, so they're all active right now. I'm going to go ahead and first add that additional column here. So I'm going to find the user ID. So there is the field, and I'm going to say OK. And as that resorts, you can see here, I do have one that has my SA account that's listed here. All of these other items existed in the system before this version. So if they didn't have changes, you can see that they are showing up as blank here. So let's just grab an item here and let's make a change here. We'll just put the generic description in there and save it. So we've made a simple change and close out. We can refresh the smart list, and you can see now after that change, I can now see that, again, the SA account, which is what I'm logged in as, has been the account or user that has made the last change in the system here. The tracking is there, and also the ability to report on that through smart lists or other reports as well, if you go ahead and add that field to the reports. Next, we're going to move into the HR and Payroll series, and we're going to look at those new enhancements for 18.2 in this area. The first option is an enhancement in the Build Payroll Checks window. So within this window, we can see it highlighted here as well, is that we have the ability to include additional taxes for federal, state, and local, or essentially what this functionality is giving us the option to not include those because we now have that checkbox there to take those off. I'm not going to go ahead and demo this one to get to a point to building checks, but we can see here easy enough to remove those options. So how this works is that those will all be checked if you're going through an upgrade and you have existing option IDs that are saved out there. You will have those fields checked and you'll have the ability to take those off if you want to. So just like the other fields in this window is when you go ahead and build or make a change in here, it will ask you to save those changes. So that will save with that default ID and will be retained the next time you open that up. If you take that off for a certain reason and need to normally have that turned on for that option, you want to just make sure to remember to make those changes again. The next change is also dealing with the payables or the payables integration into payroll. So this is an enhancement where we basically have another field here, and that allows us to pick the remit to address for that vendor ID. So if we have vendor ID that might have a different remit to that we want to change or change specifically for the payroll purposes, we can go ahead and have a whole different address ID in the system and pick that for this purpose. So inside of GP, under the HR and Payroll series, under Setup, we have our Payables integration here. So we can go ahead and pick vendors, and I'll just go ahead and open up the one I have set up in the system here. Is that we will now see that new field here, again, where I can go ahead and pick a different remit to address and select that and save it for this employee vendor record. Next, we're going to talk about a new feature for the deduction and benefit quick assignment functionality. This window will allow us to go ahead and assign these in bulk, as it describes here. So to be able to not have to add those individually to a group of employees. This is a nice feature, especially in a new plan year, if we have some new codes that need to be set up and we need to assign those to a group or maybe all employees. We can go ahead and use the filters and the options here to do that much more quickly than having to do that individually. Looking at this inside of GP, to me this one can be a little bit tricky to find. It's not in the windows directly as far as the navigation that I know of. I'm navigating under HR and Payroll again and under Setup, and I'm going to go ahead and open my deduction setup window. Inside of this window, if I go under Go To, I can now go ahead and pull up the Quick Code Assignment window. So inside of here, we can go ahead and see that I have the window from the screenshot in the slides, and I could go ahead and proceed with picking a certain code. So I'll go ahead and pick the insurance one, and now it shows my employees down on the bottom. Again, I may want to filter this by some of the other options. So maybe I'm go ahead and filter by the sales team, and I'll go ahead and apply that, and you can see my list got shorter down here now. And again, I can use kind of any combination of that, and I can even go ahead and check a few of these individually, or I can mark all. One other thing I'll call out here is we can exclude the inactive employees. So that is, again, another filter. So that might be a helpful one as well, just because we don't need to go back and add that to employees that are no longer active. Once we have the right options here, I'm going to go ahead and hit update. This is giving me a message just because I have HR. So we want to be careful if you are using HR, synchronize that properly with the HR side of things as well. I'm going to go ahead and proceed here, and simple as that, it's now gone ahead and added those deductions to my employees. The next feature is the ability to exclude inactive records for the HR benefit and deduction lookups. There's a number of screens now where we can switch between the options. Do we want to show or hide the inactive records? So you can see those listed on the screen here. On the left-hand side, just like other GP windows, we have that blue menu option with that drop-down arrow there. And if we click on that arrow, we're going to see the menu pop up, and we can go ahead and click on the Exclude Inactive Benefits. So that's going to refresh our window right away and take those out of the view. If we want to make that our standard or default and have that excluding inactives all the time unless we change it, just be sure that after you make that change, click on that drop-down arrow one more time, and then click on Set as Default View. So then for your user, when you're looking at those windows, it's going to start off with filtering out those inactive benefits. The next feature we're going to talk about is employment history tracking. The change that has happened is that we have the 3 date fields that are listed: the hire date, the adjusted hire date, and the last day worked. If those are changed on the employee record and payroll, or also in the HR employee windows, it will now track that to the employment history record. So we'll see those entries and be able to look that up in the employment history inquiry and track those changes within that screen. So navigating in GP, I'm going to go ahead and open up my employee maintenance card. I am in the payroll series right now, but again, this would work in HR as well. I'm going to go ahead and pick one of my employees here, and I'm going to enter a last day work. So that workday is going to be, let's say, January 1st of 22. So I'm going to make that out into the future just so that I know it's past any dates in my sample company, and I'll go ahead and save and OK that. So now I'm going to navigate down into my inquiry windows here. I'm going to go under employee, under the human resources, and I will go ahead and find that same employee record. So now I'll go to employment history under the go to, and here we will have that new entry where you can see my last day worked, and the reason that this is getting tracked again is that that field had changed. So again, getting some additional tracking here inside of the system for changes on those date fields. So one last enhancement to the payroll series here that we are going to talk about, and that is the ability to reprint pay statements for an entire check run. If we needed to go back or get access to that for that full pay run rather than a single employee, this gives us that option through the reprint journals. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to GP here, and we'll take a look at how to do that. Here we are in GP, and I'm going to go ahead and make my report section a little bit bigger, and we're looking for this reprint journals option. So I'm going to hit the drop down here, and we'll scroll down a little bit till we find our reprint pay statement. And you can see I have this option already saved. We'll go ahead and modify it. But we do need the audit trail code is the filter that we want to use for the restriction. Using the lookup here, though, one of the nice features is that if you're running one payroll on a certain day, a lot of times even just over a week or two, it should be nice and easy to find, to be able to sort or to just do a search here and find by that posting date. So once we find that audit trail code, we can go ahead and insert that as our restriction, and I'm going to hit print. My report's going to go to screen here, and you can see I have 4 pages. So I have 4 different employees here as I scroll down that generated a pay statement for this run. You can go ahead and reprint all of these at this point and use that as needed. So that wraps up the enhancement list for Dynamics GP 18.2, which again was released in October of 2019. So thanks for joining me. I hope you found some useful new features that are available to you now. Please feel free to use the social media contacts at the bottom. Check out the blog site for additional content in the future. And again, if you're using these slides, note that those hyperlinks are on there for each one of the features. So you can click on that title and take you to the What's New documentation for Microsoft for some additional information. So again, thank you for joining me and have a great day.